Blimey, okay, fine. So here we are. You made a real mess of talk and burn.
I did not. So I talked about Tesco earlier. I watched Terry Leahy, who I said I think was a great chief exec. I think he stayed a bit too long.
Yeah.
I watched Jeff Mulcahy at Kingfisher do the same thing. And these
you believe in yourself, I think. Don't you? You think you can walk on water.
You go, once you've done these big executive jobs, everyone around you, once you've been in the job for sort of 7 or 8 years, owes their loyalty to you.
Yeah.
And you've done it enough times, you start to think you know the right answer before you've seen the data.
And yet, you see, if you look at in the NHS, the most successful trusts we've got are where there's been stability, and we've had leaders in place for a long time.
Well, and I take my hat off to them, and I think there are some really amazing leaders who have done that in the NHS and kept fresh.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because the sector has changed so much, there's been so much difference. I think it's very rare that people can do that.
Huge people business isn't about relationships. I mean, like everything is. Oh, anyway, so you pitched up.
So my logic, just to was you shouldn't stay as the chief exec of a big PLC for more than 7 or 8 years, because you start to just believe your own.
They say a cycle of 5, don't they?
Yeah, and so I very consciously knew that that's what I wanted to do, and so 18 months ago I started thinking about clock's ticking. If I'm going to stop after 7 to 8 years, I need to know what I'm going to do next.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so you ended up with us, beached in the NHS. Now, I completely opposed your appointment, as you know.
There we go.
Listen, what can I've got to tough this out, haven't I? Really, what can I do? Find your balls, Roy. This is the moment for it. No, I opposed your appointment. I still do. I think you're a bad appointment. You're a great person, but a wrong appointment for us. Because you're the boss of an arm's length regulator, but you have such an indelible fingerprint from the Conservative Party, taking the Tory whip in the House of Lords, married to an MP, mates with the Camerons. You can't be arm's length, and I just think that you are the last person I would have employed. Discuss.
Well, let's take the politics head on, which seems to be the issue, as opposed to any competence. We can deal with competence.
I speak as an ex-Conservative leader of a council.
So let's take the politics first. Yeah. So I quite rightly had a bit of a grilling about this from the Select Committee.
Not enough, I didn't think.
Well, I don't. So I am a Conservative peer. I am married to a Conservative MP. I can't change that at all.
Well, you
I've
could.
spent. Well, I can't change my marriage. I love him. That would be wrong. But I've spent the last 8 years lobbying government to change their broadband policy. Actually, lobbying our dear Secretary of State for Health when he violently disagreed with me. So I don't think the fact that I'm married to a Conservative MP should be in any way relevant, actually, to whether or not I'm independent. And as I said in the Select Committee, I think it would be disingenuous of me to give up the Conservative whip, to pretend that all of a sudden I'm not married to a Conservative MP. Now, and I know that if a general election is called next month, next year, in 5 years' time, I'll go and campaign for my husband like I have done every time we stood, with my blue rosette on my lapel. And if I pretend that I am a crossbencher in the Lords, I think that's worse. That I have absolutely no hesitation in challenging government, whichever party they're from. That's how you should judge me, on my competence rather than my familial relationships. Or, if you look at my record...
When did you go into the House of Lords?
3 and a bit years ago.
So we can't nail you for voting for the Langley reforms.
You can't.
What a shame.
And you won't while I'm doing this
would
job.
Would you have done?
While I'm doing this job, I've given a commitment that I won't vote on any health issues. I also, this is a delicate one because you go into the House of Lords to contribute your expertise. I always joke, and it's not really a joke, that the House of Commons people are a mile wide and an inch deep. We elect our MPs to represent us on all issues, so they know a little bit about everything. Whereas the House of Lords, you're appointed ideally because you know something deeply about a narrow subject, and the idea is you contribute based on what you know. But I'm not saying that I'll never speak on health-related issues, because that would be against the sort of principle of the Lords, but I would be very, very cautious about speaking on things in the Lords to respect the independence of the role. And on my board, I have 2 Labour peers who've taken the Labour whip, who've both voted on health issues, spoken, and they're brilliant, both Lord Carter and Lord Dawes. I'm incredibly lucky to have them both. And I think maybe this is not a popular view, but the fact that there are people working across the NHS who have political views who park that and do a brilliant job for the National Health Service regardless of their political view. And I think it's important that politics doesn't become such a negative thing that no one's allowed to express any political view on anything ever, because actually then we will get the politicians we truly deserve.
Well, okay, so we'll park there, I suppose. Harumphs. You've taken the lid off the tin. I know you've been around and had a look. What do you think?
Well, I'm a retailer, as we've said, and I learned.
You've been
by
around the
getting
shop,
out.
been around the
I
branches.
need to. Yeah, I have, and that's why I came, because I started visiting hospitals a year ago and found the health service getting under my skin as I discovered the amazing people that work in it, the families that use it, that are the same people I've served in a consumer business all
Do
my
you
life.
use the NHS?
I do indeed. Well, I've been an amateur jump jockey all my life, so
Yeah.
I have
Well,
more
I need
knowledge
to talk
of
to
A&E
you about that.
than is good
I
for
said
me.
rats, pigs, and we'll get onto the
Horses.
Yeah.
So how have I found it? I am so glad I made this decision. 4 months in, that has to be beyond a honeymoon period. I couldn't be happier with having joined. I love it. And that is in no way to diminish the scale of the challenge or the size of the opportunities. Actually, that's one of the reasons I love it, because it is endlessly fascinating, incredibly difficult, and hugely important.
Okay, well, let's cut to the quick. I mean, the NHS, I've been around it since 1974. I've never seen it in shit this deep. We've got 3/4 of our hospitals who can't balance the books. They're in irrecoverable debt. We've got, 30,000, certainly nurse vacancies, shortages, probably 100,000 people short of people doing the job. There's an exodus now of senior management because of the pension issues. We've abandoned all the targets. We can't meet them. It's swamped, and it runs really on the smell of money and the oil of perspiration.
Of its people.
Yeah, and it's the perspiration of its people. I mean, I suppose really the big issue for you now is what happens about the DEL, the departmental expenditure limit.
I'm not sure that is the big issue for me,
Well,
actually.
it will be, won't it?
Let me tell you, I didn't properly answer your question on what I found and what I think. I'm trying to hold I'm trying to hold 3 things in my head all at the same time. The first thing is that this is the best health system in the world, and the public narrative, maybe understandably, is always negative, or almost always negative. One of the small positive things I thought last week in all the media coverage about the weather was the extraordinary stories of heroism in the NHS. And for the first time since I've been sort of avidly watching and listening and reading all the health coverage, it was only positive about what people were doing in the NHS. And so I don't think we do enough to remind ourselves that whether you objectively measure it via the Commonwealth Fund or whoever, or whether you just know in your heart that it's one of the great things that for Britain, our NHS. Everyone who works in it, a principle of free at the point of delivery, and it's brilliant. So I'm trying to remember that, despite all of the challenges.
Well,
that's number one.
Well, we all agree.
I have got 2
we all
others.
agree that.
So that's number one. We all agree it, but we don't say it enough. And if you're working in any institution where every time you read about it, you're told about its crisis or near demise, it cannot be a great place to be. So that's number one. Number 2 is, even though it's the best system in the world, it could be so much better. Whether you're looking at improving quality, or whether you're looking, by the way, I think these are completely aligned, improving efficiency. And you only have to be a patient for 10 minutes to know that. And every patient I talk to, friends, family, the pleasure and privilege of this job is everyone tells you that it could be much more effective. We could deliver better patient outcomes and spend our citizens' money more wisely. So that's the second.
Well, hang on. Do you really think we can deliver better outcomes? I mean, when you talk about outcomes, tread softly.
Well, I think
because what do you mean by outcomes?
Well, firstly, we live in a country where people are living longer and living longer better, which is my third point, which is even if we level up to the best practice in everything across the country, everyone does the best that we could imagine, we're still going to need more money, which is the third thing. You're right to hold me on the money. I just actually don't think it's the only thing that I should be worrying about, or arguably the most important, actually,
I think it's
which may be very contentious.
I sort of agree that we shouldn't take our eye off the rest. But if you look, for example, cancer outcomes, which are in the news today because poor Bill Turnbull. Yes. If you look at Eurostat on cancer outcomes, they're going to try and persuade you we're worse than Poland.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, it's the way they capture the data.
Exactly.
Yeah. It just isn't true. And when you look at maternity outcomes, it's because we assiduously capture the data honestly and regularly and using the same basis. So I'm not saying that we are best at everything. No healthcare system can be, and there's a very good book by Mark Bricknell that's worth reading. He sat there and stole the idea of his book from me. And if you're listening, Mark, hi. I think we need to park all that. We have to talk about the money.
Yeah, of course we do.
Because we've had flatline funding for 7 years, 8 years, against 4% growth. Now, the politicians will tell you we've had increases in money, and they're they're minuscule, and then there's an argument with...
Depends what you think about billions as being minuscule, but...
Well, we haven't had billions extra. And, the row that Simon Stevens had with Number 10 over the money, where they tried to put the 2 previous years' money in with the 4 years that followed. It just isn't true. And if you look at the trajectory of funding, we can't continue on with about 4% growth. Since 1948 up to 2010, the NHS has had on average about 4% uplift every year. It goes up and down like a fiddler's elbow. But if you draw a straight line, it's about 3.8 to 4%, 1948 to 2010. 2010, all hell breaks loose with the economy, the world banking crisis, and the rest of it. Since then, the trajectory from 2010 to 2020 is just under 2%. Growth, 4%. We can't do it. Now, your predecessor regime, Ed and Jim, who both, they were hugely popular. And they pulled off a masterstroke to not quite deliver the Dell by very creative accounting, by calling in reserves, converting capital to revenue, looking down the back of the sofa for the last 2 bob. You can't do that again this year because it's been done. So what happens now? We can't, with the debt roll forward, we're pushing a bow wave of debt as it is. What happens?
Look, I don't disagree with you that more money is needed to come into health and social care. That's my third of my 3 points. What I would challenge is that we can't also help ourselves. I think it's possible for both to be true at the same time.
Right, let's deal with that. Because for every 100 quid we spend 70 quid on staff. 30 quid we spend on back office supplies, bits and pieces, all the Carter stuff. Carter says he's going to save 5 billion by 2020. You've got 100 weeks left. Can't hear the money rattling in the tin. If you save 5% of your back office costs, you, as a business woman, you know very well, saving 5% with almost no investment is bloody difficult. But let's say we do. We save 5% of the 30 quid. That's £1.50.
Yeah, but you're assuming
you
that the most important assets in the NHS is people don't change at all either. So when I flippantly said I'm not sure that managing the Dell is the most important thing that I'm worrying about, I think that the levers that you have to change the way the service operates, the most important lever is the way that we lead and engage our people.
Right, we haven't had it. Well, hang on.
Because it underpins everything.
Well, the staff haven't had a pay rise for nurses since 2010, and it's been kicked into the long grass now until probably April of next year. we're losing.
That's above my pay grade, those discussions. So,
but it's the national. The
right,
award is made nationally with the pay review bodies. What I'm saying, I'm not saying it's your fault, and I'm not asking you to defend it. What I'm saying is, what do we do to get out of it?
And I'm saying that I don't think that you should allied pay with leadership. I think that clearly being fairly paid for your job is an important part of feeling valued in any job, but it is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. And you look at the difference. What I would say is I've gone around the trusts, and bear in mind, what do I know? I've only been in this system for 4 months. So now every day the learning curve is vertical, but when I go and visit trusts that are on any measure performing really well, when you try and probe why, it always comes down to the way that people are being led, the culture in that organisation, the way they're focused on doing what's right for patients, listening to people. There's an extraordinary chart in the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians report that charts the engagement with Freedom to Speak Up Guardians with CQC ratings on the different questions from their survey. And for those of us that come from outside the system, it is unsurprising that where people feel safe to speak up, they deliver much better quality and care. And where they don't, where they feel that they can't speak up, that you're much more likely to have poor quality and real safety issues. And I've seen that, as a layperson going around trusts. So I think the way that, this, as I say, it may seem it isn't meant to be fluffy at all. It really isn't. I think the way that we tackle all of the issues in the health service is by focusing first on people and culture, because actually that's what unlocks your ability to drive change. And whether that's technology-based change, property-based change, process-based change, such as the Carter work, or fundamental service-based change, and practice change, such as Tim Briggs's work. All of that requires engaging leadership, and if you don't have it, none of it works. And I'm not saying that on its own means that you can magically balance the numbers. Actually, my point 3 of my 3 says you probably can't. But I don't think we have the credibility as a service to bring the public with us for what is undoubtedly going to need more money in health and social care as we work out as a society what does growing old mean to us and how do we want to care for an ageing population where technology enables us to care for people. This is, by the way, a problem of success, not failure. I don't want to live in a country where people are not living longer and technology doesn't enable me to treat conditions. And it's not an NHS-specific problem, it's a global healthcare problem. We won't solve it societally and get the additional money that we need unless we're also learning and changing as a service. The good thing is the NHS has delivered greater productivity improvements than the rest of the UK economy over the last 3 or 4 years. And that's an amazing testimony to the way that the service has coped with the pressures that you undoubtedly are right in setting out.
1.2% against 0.2%.
Yeah.
I get all that, and I mean there is no argument to the logic that you give us tonight about how you manage affairs better and how you look at the efficiency gains that might come from having people that are well treated. But you still come back to the fact that, and I'm sorry to be tedious, but you are the regulator. You're the boss of the regulator that's got to bring the hospitals home in balance. And I'm saying to you, I don't think you can do it, and I don't think you do either.
Well, I've just said in my 3 things. I do think in the end more money is needed. I think that you see, as Ian Dalton has said several times in the last few months, as he's got to learn in his new role, you see a lot of trusts managing this really difficult balancing act extremely well. You don't see all of them. And so our focus needs to be in how we support and challenge the trusts that are having the hardest time balancing everything. You also see, as you've rightly pointed to, a lot of non-recurrent, one-off things have been done. Some of those are good things to have been done, by the way, but it's not sustainable for the long term. I completely agree, and we do all have to face into that. But it is. Maybe I'm just too much of an optimist. I think
Well,
that it is possible to drive positive change.
If you're not an optimist, then we're doomed. But Christ, we're all doomed. But I mean, if you look at some of these hospitals that end up getting in a real financial mess, they go into financial special measures. What happens? Somebody comes along and gives them more money. Really? Well, why didn't they just give them more money in the first place? We drive the enthusiasm out of management by the way we treat them. I mean, you've got a background in Harvard. You understand about quality. What are we still doing, sending charabancs full of people with clipboards and caps to inspect hospitals, for Christ's sake?
I'm not going to get into too much of a debate on your well-known views of the CQC. I'd like to say it's not my purview. Not my purview. I think that no. Let's talk briefly about my shop, about NHS Improvement, and you sort of challenge about the special measures regime. I would be the first to admit that I think I've been saying in groups around the system, the sort of phrase of physician heal thyself. There's quite a lot of work that we've got to do within NHS Improvement to do a better job at supporting trusts and living up to the name. To my mind, the clue is in the name, improvement. That's what our purpose ought to be. I don't think of us actually as a regulator. We have regulatory powers. It's in the toolkit. It's an important part of the toolkit. But it's not our purpose.
Well, you're monitor, really, aren't you? You're monitor, really. Like still in law, you're monitor.
And the TDA.
TDA, yeah.
But I think the clue ought to be in the name, and I think there's a lot of work that we need to do internally and with our sister organisation, NHS England. So what trusts, leadership teams and people on the ground tell me is that on a good day, we might all ask for the same data request at the same time in just a slightly different format. That's a good day. On a bad day, we directly contradict each other. And that's not helping. And so I don't think that you can answer the question of what is NHS Improvement really doing without properly answering how do we work better with NHS England.
When are you going to merge with NHS England?
Well, I don't think we can merge legally. That is one of the gifts of the legislation.
No, you can't.
I don't think you can do what we've done with the TDA and monitor.
You can work in common.
Yeah, we can do what we're asking.
You've set up a committee, haven't you?
So,
a lot of people won't know that. Tell us about your new committee.